Hello everyone, welcome to day 3, the final day of Gotland Game Conference 2025. Wow, what a ride. So glad to see many of you here. Today's first talk, I have the great pleasure of introducing Phil Harris, who is an experienced writer, narrative designer, producer, systems designer, concept designer, has worked in television, game design as a consultant on all kinds of different game projects. Recently also running Scotland's oldest tabletop role-playing game convention called Compulsion. Here today to talk to us about the difference between what narrative design really is and how it's different from writing. I will not waste more of your time, Phil. I will hand over to you. Very welcome. An applause.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. It's really pleased to speak to you about what is narrative design and why it is different from writing. So the basics, there are 4 basics for me. They are creation, consistency, connection, and interrogation. And we'll go through each of them individually. And for creation, I talk about the campfire, the kernel, and the world. So let's talk about the campfire. Imagine you're cold, you're tired. You come across like a mountain pass. You need some warmth, and you find a campfire. It's been abandoned. But in the hearth, there are some embers. And you see those embers, and you see the opportunity to blow on those embers and reignite the fire. You grab some kindling, you put it down, and you blow gently. And the flames come alight. And with the flames, every story around that fireplace becomes alive. It becomes vibrant. It becomes part of like the story. And narrative design is about blowing on those embers. It's about awakening those memories of like history, those memories of politics, those memories of like religion, those memories of love, those memories of hate. It's about awakening them and then listening to the spirits that are created through that, understanding where these came from, where these stories came from, where they evolved from, what the importance of this story was, why it's important here, why is it important at this campfire, and why is it important in this center. And then the kernel. These ideas, these concepts, they give you a place to start. They give you an idea. It doesn't have to be a hero. It doesn't have to be an item. It could be a dystopian future. It could be any other concept. It could be a garden. It could be a spaceship. It could just be that place to start. And by awakening these embers, you've started on like this journey. Maybe you've got a concept with the team already, but you've awakened that part of the concept. Is it machinery? Is it the future? Is it the way that we act together? Is the things that we do? And that allows you to start building the initial blocks. And those initial blocks are really important because there should be many of them. You shouldn't limit yourself at this point in time. It should be a case that you've built all of this stuff up and then you create a safe space for questions. And by that, I mean that you can take this back to the rest of your team and your team can ask questions about the ideas and the concepts that you've formed. And you'll be able to answer those questions because those blocks are in place. And if those blocks aren't in place and they ask questions that aren't in the blocks, then you go back and you blow on the embers again and you go, where are those blocks? Where is that thing coming from? What's that important thing going forwards? And then we have the world. And that's when you start building out. When everybody's settled on these ideas, these understandings, they understand the brief, they understand what you're saying, you've agreed things with them, you're not dominating the rest of the team, you are working with the rest of the team to like evolve this. Then you set the limits. And the limits are the thing which are really hard to set. Because when you start setting limits to yourself, you have to start, in journalism, it's called killing babies. You've got to start identifying things which you really, really like. You love them so much. But it's just like, but what if the robot had a stutter? And like somebody goes, no, we're not doing that because it's going to take us too much time. It's out of scope, it's out of ability, it's out of what we can do. And you have to be ready to set those limits and cut things from like the stuff that you're doing. You have to be ready to accept that. This whole industry is about understanding that you can't be precious about things. You just have to, because you're always going to lose some things. But what I say, and what I have, if you went onto my laptop, you would find oodles and oodles of notes where I've put things which I really, really liked, and I've just like stored them away for later. And if you want a good example of that, in the graphic novel I wrote, Closed Circle, I introduce a scene that I thought of 15 years earlier. And I was just writing it, and I was like, oh my God, this is the perfect place for this scene. So you don't lose anything. You don't lose anything from like creation. And then you review it, which means you go back to the team, go, look what I've written. And they're like, well, that's not what I gave you. But you go back and you start to say, this is what I've got. This is how I've expanded it. And this cyclical process between the campfire, the kernel, and the world is something that you'll go through a number of iterations to like get it right, to get these things together and to get them to work together. And then we move on to consistency and the words engagement and perspective. Now, if any of the people I'd mentored here were here, they'd be, he's mentioned the P word, because I talk about perspective a lot, believe me. But we'll start with engagement. Who is your audience? Who are you writing this for? Who are you creating this world for? And why do they care? I think you're aware that games can't be for everybody, and you've just got to live with that. You can reskin a game, and it can be really, really appropriate to two different like pools of people. But you really, really need to know why your audience is going to care about these things. And as I go forward in these slides, you're going to understand more and more how important this is, because they're not going to care about something which doesn't engage them, which isn't like interesting to them. They're not going to care if it's something that is about, say you decide to create a world where everybody's like a different color or a different like mathematical shape. There's no context with our own world. There's nothing for people to engage in unless they live in a world where they think we're all like colors and like different shapes. I don't. And so then it's about what the world means to them, what the world says to them, and things like this, and what you're trying to say in like this story. One of the pictures this week, they talked about witch finders and things like this. It's just like, great. It's just like, don't worry about covering like difficult subjects. Just understand that you need to understand those difficult subjects to be able to cover them. And also, engagement is about keeping on point. So you've created this world and you've created these ideas. Don't step out of here and go somewhere else. If you're doing that, you're creating a different game. You're creating a different world. You're creating a different environment. Be secure in what you're creating and what you're doing. Sometimes you'll get like negative because like the build that you put in front of people or something isn't quite right, because it's not expressing like the world that you really, really want to express to these people. But as long as you've got the intention, as long as you understand that, you push through and you go, right, I'm learning from this process. This is great. Some of the students that I talked to last year who felt that I was overly critical came back to me this year and said, oh, look, we've made changes. Or we've done these like things. It's great because they've listened, and listening is a really, really key point here. Perspective. Understanding the world. There's belief, economy, and happiness there. This is a non-exhaustive list. Perspective. Let me talk about perspective. So, your writer may have created a hero in this world, or a heroine, or whatever you want, or an interesting like dog that runs like around like the adventure. And this perspective the writer is doing will always be from like the dog, the hero, the heroine's like perspective. That's what they're like being paid to write about. Narrative designer needs to go, what are the villains thinking in this piece? Or the enemies, or the abstraction. Somebody said to me, oh, we've like written this game from the point of view of the room. Great, there's a different perspective. Sometimes looking at perspective, once the narrative designer's given you the world, things like this, looking at this perspective goes, well, hang on, this is a more interesting story here. Maybe the villain's story is more interesting than the hero's story that you originally noted. Maybe the story is about an object rather than a person themselves. Excalibur being a really, really good example of like a sword which is like gone through like the ages. But it's not as important as the sword that's pulled from the stone, which I said to myself, I must remember that sword's name, and I forgot, because that's the sword that defined kings. So maybe that sword turns up later and not Excalibur. And people, because they don't really like know the stuff so well, they don't know what that sword's name is. But as you reveal it through like the world and the world building, you're suddenly like, oh, this is the sword that made Arthur king. This sword is important. This sword was like also like the sword that Uther like drew. It's like this sword that like represents different things. I appreciate there's different versions of the Arthurian legend. There's very bad ones as well. Sean Connery, I look at you. But understanding the world, understand the belief systems that are going ahead. Understand the economy of the world. Why is the economy working? Understand what the happiness of the people are. What's the perspective from the other side of things? There's some really great accidental hero stories. But the simplest one is the man who kills, I think, 7 flies with his belt. And they think that he's talking about giants. And so off you go and like kill that giant. Perspective. That's a perspective story. It's about understanding those perspectives. And if you want really good stories of perspective, really simple ones, read Aesop's Fables. Who will bell the cat? What a great perspective. Belling the cat, it's the best idea ever. We'll always know when the cat's around. And then one of the mice goes, the older mouse goes, yeah, but who's going to bell the cat? Who's going to risk their lives to go off and like do this type of thing? Think about those things. Think about those like moral tales. Think about the perspective that's going on and how important it is to your story. And both of these things lead to connection. And the connection is what your world brings. What does it satisfy with you as the team, as well as with like the player? The word agency. Years ago, I did a talk called Agency Bollocks, because like I think the word agency is far too widely used, and it's just like, oh, give it more agency. What do you mean by give it more agency? Agency, in this case, is about the agency of the player. What is the player's agency in this? What are you hoping for them to do? Do you know the rule of 5? I was talking about the rule of 5 last night, where if you give a player more than 5 things to do at the same time, they can't concentrate on all 5 of them. People can only remember 4 key kernel points going forward, cardinal points. It's shown by the game that you do with children, where you lay out items on a table and you put a cloth over them. Children tend to only remember 4. Some people can remember 5. I'm not saying that everybody can't. But as soon as people feel that they're missing something, they either feel nervous or they feel excited. And there's agency in there as well. So you can either have too many elements going on for them at the same time, or you can have not enough. Skyrim, there's a lot of talk about Skyrim and people like playing Skyrim forever and ever and ever and never getting to the end of the plot. In Skyrim, all the side quests had 5 interchangeable elements in them. And so people looked at the quest, and even it said, deliver bread to Mr. Higgins right across the map. They were like, oh, this is important. This is a plot point. And I need to go and do it because it looked different from the other quests. They couldn't tell the side quests from like the main quests. And therefore, you see a lot of people who didn't feel in Skyrim, they played it for hours because they'd been delivering bread and like these coins had to go here and like, oh, well, somebody else wants to assassinate you. So it's what that agency is to your player. What does it really, really mean to them? What are you trying to say to them? This is where the writer really integrates us in as well and says, oh, I think you should be saying this as well. Discovery. What are they discovering in the world? If we go back to Bartle and like the 4 types of player, or you can look at like the Quantic Foundry's like views of player engagement, which is great. Quantic Foundry's stuff is brilliant. This discovery is like, what are they discovering from themselves? And therefore, what satisfaction are they getting from that discovery? Are they getting some satisfaction from that discovery? Because if they are, then you're winning and you're doing that and they're having fun. Narrative design, and going back to the Bartle model, doesn't cover killers for lots of reasons, because killers are cheats. There's value in killers, can I just say? Game, I've forgotten it, but there was a game where they just took everybody who cheated on like the servers and put them on their own server because they could analyze all the data from like the way that they were trying to cheat, and it could mean Titanfall, original Titanfall. They had a cheat server. Brilliant. I really, really love that. Absolutely love it. And your team. The narrative designer has a real opportunity to be the heart of the team. If you find a narrative designer who's like got a frisson with the team and it's a negative frisson, it's probably the wrong narrative designer for you. And it's the wrong narrative designer for your team. Don't sacrifice the team for a narrative designer. I'm saying that. By being at the heart of the team, it means a designer can come up and go, I'm thinking about this combat system. What would work in here? Oh, they use spears. Make sure it's like involving like spears. What does this look like? It's just like, what's the heraldry? Well, the castle's on a high, high cliff on a mountain. But they originally came from a fishing community much lower and they were forced up the mountain. So the fish symbol is part of their heraldry. And that's why it's there. Do we need to explain this to the players first time round? No, we don't. Of course we don't. But they may go, why is there a fish on that symbol? If you've got, I'm going to talk about this as well. If you've got the confidence there, it's absolutely like fine. How does this sound? What type of like things do they use? If Jabberwocky, the film, Terry Gilliam, based on Terry Gilliam book, not Terry Jones' book, I do apologise. Jabberwocky, when they go to the court, it's really, really dirty and filthy, and all the music and instruments are out of tune, and it's terrible. And it's probably more historically accurate than all of these things where it's shiny and nice with like silvery armor and things like this. But when you watch the whole of Jabberwocky, they're doing that for the whole of like the world, and you understand the world, and therefore this like makes sense in the world as well. And then interrogation, the how and the why. As a narrative designer, if you don't interrogate your work, you're not a good narrative designer. That's it, full stop. How does this work? This castle on like the high cliff that I talked about, things like this, where do they get their water from? Do they magically create it? If they're creating it through magic, what happens if the magic user gets ill? There are reasons that Edinburgh Castle has been sieged and taken. It's because it has no real water source. There used to be a loch below like Edinburgh Castle. Yes, it's a massively defensive like location, but all you have to do is sit outside of catapult or cannon shot and just go, they're going to run out of water at some point, let's go for this. Carcassonne is another really, really good example. There's the very classic tale of the Dame of Carcassonne who said, oh no, we're never going to be able to get rid of them from our walls, so let's feed this last pig all the food that we've got and fire it over as like a catapult thing. And then when the pig splits open and all the food spills, they'll get demoralized because they'll be, oh, they've got tons of food in there if they can afford to feed the pigs all this like really, really expensive food. How are we translating that to the player? Do we need to? Can we leave that mystery for the players to engage in? A lot of narrative design is about the tip of the iceberg and not the whole of the iceberg. Narrative design is down in the iceberg. A lot of stuff that I've written has never seen the light of day, but it makes the world above it work. Why is this relevant? Why is it like this? Why does the player care? Always, as a narrative designer, go back and ask yourself the how and why questions, and ask the rest of the team the how and why questions. We need the portcullis of this castle open when they're coming round. Well, portcullises should be down. Is this in a time of war? They're never going to have the portcullis up unless you've got some really, really good reason. And then you need to state that reason for the player. Because once engagement breaks with a player, once player loses engagement, you've lost them. It's very, very much the case that you've lost them. And if you want to analyze engagement in products, if you want to understand this stuff, go back and play a game that you stopped playing. Or go back and watch a TV series that you stopped watching, things like this. And go and analyze it and ask why. Ask why you stopped watching it. What made you just drop out of it? Maybe it wasn't your thing and it initially had that intention. That's fine as well. As I said, all types of products are made for all types of people. But just understand that this how and this why, this interrogation, is really, really, really important for you in how you're going to go about things. And then useful tips. Magic doesn't exist. Sorry, it doesn't. This is really important to understand because when I worked on Chorus, basically the creative director at the time said, can you give an intention while these cosmic horror beings are doing this stuff? And I was I'm not really comfortable with giving an intention to a cosmic horror because it's a cosmic horror because we don't understand it. So I gave it an intention, and then I got the question, but how do they get born? It's just I don't really want to address this subject. This is getting really, really complex. It's just I don't need to know if they shop at Aldi. Because it's not really, really going to help the plot line. And strangely, they're going to feel less and less like cosmic horror and more like mundanity. And magic is exactly the same thing. The more you try and explain magic, the more it just turns into science or a pseudoscience going forwards. And therefore, you lose the whole magic of magic. You can say magic came when the moon cracked and fell from the sky and things like this. Great, it's absolutely brilliant. Don't go any further. If the players say to you, why did the moon crack? And you don't care, don't tell them why the moon cracked. It's just it's one of those mysteries of the universe. It's one of those things that happened and that's when the magic happened. It's one of those things that really, really entered into the fray. It's why the magic was there. Elemental systems are really, really solid, but remember that different cultures see different elements as key elements to elemental systems. Understand how your magic works for you, how it has to work for your game, how it has to work for your world. Understand what the designers want to do with the magic system, the artists want to do with the magic system, how this magic is going to come in, because then magic does exist, but just for your team. And that's where magic is. Think about is it secret? Is it safe? Think about Gandalf and think about the fact that Gandalf and the way Tolkien writes magic, it's so, you don't really see it. It's really, really powerful. I mean, it's off the grade powerful. You will not pass. Not you shall not pass. It's you will not pass, as written in the book. It means has a different intention and a different meaning between the film and the book. Magic, he smashes a bridge and goes off to fight a Balrog. And then Tolkien goes, exit right. And I'm not going to talk to you about like how Gandalf fought the like Balrog. He comes back and he comes up with a tale of like, oh yes, we tousled and turned and like, great, nice one, Gandalf. It's just like, how did you actually do it? Well, these are like the mysteries of like the world. These are the mysteries and things like this. But you are convinced, you believe that these things exist, and that's great, and the reason you get to belief is the third point there, but I'm going to start with the second point, which is do not reinvent the wheel. This relates to the third point as well. Maybe I should have put the third point second. There you go. An economy takes time to form. It takes time to create. It takes time to come in. If you look at something, I use the East India Trade Company as like my main like basis for villains because they're great for it. There's so much like going on there, which is very, very questionable. But their economy is partly based on privateering and like piracy and things like this. And partly it's just like, you've got free reign as long as you don't attack any British or like Dutch ships. Hey, that's good, things like this. Do you want to like give guns to like really questionable groups in like India who are going to like oppress like the rest of the people? Good by us, as long as we're getting like the resources. Great, great, great. But that economy makes sense. When you actually analyze that economy, it makes sense. But historically, it took time to like form. Different events allowed different things to happen. Different passes of policy made these things like come together. And therefore, don't reinvent the wheel. If you try and create an economy for your game which is different from any other economy in the world, people will lose their engagement because it won't make any sense to them. There's a famous article on like Slay Industries, which is a role-playing game, done by some friends of mine across in Glasgow. It's a great role-playing game. But another a sort of doyen of like role-playing in the very first issue of Interzone said the economy doesn't work because you can't have a world ruled by one company because who do they sell to? And like how does that sale work? And like how does that, I think that this money has no meaning, therefore money has no worth and things like this. He was writing it as fun, but it's a good like commentary on this. Players will notice that. Players are sharp. It's just like, no, this doesn't really work. If you're writing a game about a shoe shop and you need to know about different types of shoes, there's already a lot of different types of shoes out there. Use those shoes. Don't reinvent new types of shoes because anybody who like knows about shoes will go, well, that doesn't work as a shoe, or that would be like really terrible. Things like this. But what this all comes down to is history takes time. If we look at religion, religion is like formed usually from the sun at the very, very early basis because primitive like mankind, sun goes in sky, flowers open, birds tweet, fish come to the surface. Somebody's doing that for us. Yes, it's the sun, but why do we not like give that sun a name? And the first religions for me are scientific inquiry. It's just like, but what can God do? And what can God not do? And understanding that, and then understanding the little steps that make, as the church becomes more powerful, as it starts to take control over like different like elements, what are they doing and things like this. Don't always understand that all of these things, economies, politics and things like this, they all formed somewhere. And you can easily take a template from like history, including lots of failed templates. There's tons of failed templates out there for phrenology, and like still use them in your game. You could have like phrenology in your game and be a major part of a magic system, because magic does exist and phrenology works. And therefore, we found that a way of like feeling the bumps on somebody's head is a way that we can unlock secret powers. And therefore, you've got this stuff. And also, you've got tons of like excellent Victoriana and things like this on like phrenology that you can use. And you can like just alter slightly. And it then fits into your world going forwards. So there's a real thing about not reinventing the wheel. And there's a couple of people have said to me before, well, firstly, I don't think you can plagiarize history. That's a thing. Secondly, Worldcon 75, I was on a panel talking about how economies in the world don't work. And different people talked about different things like Snowpiercer, the economy doesn't work. It can't work. You can't have enough cattle on the train to be able to breed enough cattle to like feed it. I know it's an analogy for something else, but just on like that basis. The Death Star. The Empire spends an awful lot of money building the Death Star. It shoots 2 planets and gets blown up. And they build a second one? It's just like, why haven't they stopped development on this? I don't think it's been cost effective. And also, if you see the economy drain, including like Kevin Smith's like criticism of like, oh, the second Death Star's in construction, so aren't there just construction workers on board? And you're blowing up innocent people as well to try and blow this away. There's so much like wrong with like that economy. So it's very, very easy to find economies that have failed. But that economy, say you have a failed economy and you want it to have a totalitarian state, then you put a political thing. So it enforces the economy that's failing. And therefore things go up forward in a different way. I have a family history. I'm half German. I have a family history with people being taken away by the SS in National Socialist, like Germany. And that's meant that I automatically criticise a lot of games which have like German heritage. There was and talk about the Nazis. And there was a game in a game jam where they wanted to talk about the German movement into like the Netherlands during World War II and the impact of that. And they had big sort of swastikas on the walls and things like this. And I was like, no, you're going the wrong way. I said, you need to look at something like Mouse and things like this. And I was just like, I just wanted to set them on the right course. I know game jams are for 48 hours. I didn't want them to drive off. Came back, and the whole team was sitting there reading Mouse together and things like this. The game they produced was amazing after that, because they were like, oh, no, we understand what's happening here. We understand that people are like making political moves to like push things into place going forwards. I don't really want to get too political here because there's similarities, I could say, in the real world at this point in time. But I'm not going to like address that any here unless somebody asks me a question about it. Avoid ever-decreasing circles. As a narrative designer, the thing that you're meant to be concentrating on is the game. So if you have a captain in the game, and it's important to have a picture of the captain with her husband, on the things like this, then you probably want a little brief thing about what the husband looks like so the artists get that like feeling. If at some point you've gone, oh, I think they've got a cat as well, if you've suddenly got 16 pages about the cat and how the cat reacts and things like that, that's a different game. That's the cat game. That's Captain's Cat. It's a completely different game. Stop it. Learn to like control yourself. Pull things in and make sure that that doesn't happen. Ever-decreasing circles are really, really good pitfall or easy pitfall to fall into. And the fundamental functions that exist there are massive, and it's about self-editing. When I do law, and this is just me, but it works really, really well for me, I use something like Confluence, and I have a historic timeline, and that historic timeline flows through, and then I make pages of all the important things on that historic timeline going forwards. They might be characters, they may be people, they may be situations, and I just cross-reference everything. But every page has the, hey team, this is for you, and really, really easily written, and it's got a couple of quotes about the thing or the person and things like this. And then underneath that, that's the stuff I need to know. They don't need to read that, but it's the stuff I need to know. It's how this plugs into this, how this plugs into this. Council of Elrond. I'll go back to Tolkien again, but actually, no, I'll use a more modern example. Clair Obscur, Expedition 33. Gustav's arm, never explained. Fabulous. You get a good idea why it's happened, but it's never explained. And I love that, because it just adds that whole like dimension of like, we're confident enough with the world that he can have a mechanical arm. This is not a spoiler, it is in the very first scene. He can have a mechanical arm, but we don't need to explain why, because we're confident enough that the world and the world that we've created around it explains that enough that we'll allow it and it will go forward. Going back, Tolkien called Council of Elrond, dwarves, Legolas and Gimli's sort of slap fight in this conversation. Tolkien has so much background information. He has the confidence to talk about wars and situations and epic events in just passing, in the way that you would talk to a friend if something had happened in the past. You remember that time when we went out and we got roaringly drunk and then we found the inflatable dinosaur and took it home? Has happened. Then it's just but these types of things are like memories. They're things that you can talk about and other people will be involved. I think you may have been in the situation where when you've met somebody new, possibly here at the university and things like this, they've become such good friends that they're almost integrated into your life. It's like they should have always been there and they should have been part of your life. And that's also quite amusing when it's just weren't you there as well? No, we didn't know each other at that point in time. But it's a really, really important thing that these things happen, this sort of engagement, this interlinking happens. And it's the narrative designer who might necessarily do that, or it's the narrative designer who might say to the writer, could you just write this in? Or you don't need to. We're confident that everybody will understand this is the thing. Or maybe they'll just be mystified by this thing and they'll want to know more. Again, back to magic and things like this. You can't put creation in a box. This seems to counter ever-decreasing circles because ever-decreasing circles is about, obviously, controlling yourself, but being creative isn't about controlling yourself in a lot of ways. It's about letting everything go forward. But you remember in the earlier process, I said, stick everything down that you've got an idea about. Get it all out there. Save the good ideas for later if you can't do them this time. But don't try and suppress creation within the narrative process at an early stage, because you will just get a very, very flat narrative process. Pandora tried to put creation in a box. Didn't go well. But hope was left, so that's good. All of these things are reasons why narrative designers are different from writers. Narrative designers, sometimes people think creative directors are narrative designers. They're not. Creative directors should work with good narrative designers. A creative director who is also the narrative designer, in my personal opinion, usually has too much control and can force things through that the rest of the team doesn't really necessarily want. Narrative design and the belief, the engagement of narrative design is about working with the team and working in the center of the team and becoming this trusted resource of Phil, how does this work? Or Phil, what would you like to do this? Within a couple of products that I've worked on, I've had really, really good relationships with the art director. And Blake and Chorus for Deep Silverfish Labs said, you're the first person I've ever seen who can just write a brief for my concept artists and it's good enough. You don't have to add pictures and things like this because they know what you're talking about, they can feel it. And everything that's been in this slide is from my team on my products. And one of the things my teams say at gunpoint is what an amazing, what an amazing boss you are, Phil, because you give us the freedom to do things. Remember to give people the freedom to fail as well. Fail fast. I know all this adage, but you're allowed to fail. You're allowed to put something out and go, no, that's not the thing that I really, really wanted. Let's look back at it and go do it again. Let's understand this. Let's change this type of thing. A narrative designer should be available for change. And I would say that about 60% of the products that I've worked on are not on LinkedIn, and about 80 to 90% of the work I've ever done in my life has not been published. And I've got over that type of thing, usually because I get paid first. But it's that thing of understanding that type of thing. That you could have the greatest idea in the world and it can like get missed or somebody can like override it and things like this. Don't get despondent about that. You're all amazing people. All of you, even the older ones. You're all amazing people because you've actually like gone out there and done it and like pushed these things in whatever way that you do. If you want to know about, so another thing that I'd say as well, and then I'll open it up for questions. I don't think I've got another slide. Well, I do. Another thing that I'd say is start making those connections. Do not worry as a narrative designer about going out and making those connections. If you want to talk to somebody who fought in the Iraq War, go and find a group and do that. As long as you're not glorifying stuff, as long as you're going in there with an understanding of that type of thing. Wikipedia is not a research tool. It's a leading into, oh, there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there. Find the articles they reference in Wikipedia, go and read those, go and see the other things that they reference. Other things, just remember that you should be looking at things from a different perspective, again and again and again. Like, what's happening here? What's happening here? You know, I watch Fox News because I'm interested in what they say. That does not mean I listen to like Fox News. I watch it, I understand what they're saying, I understand the messages they're giving. I watch the political like machinations and things like this. I lost a friend to effectively a QAnon type cult because he just went off and then suddenly he was like, do you think the war in Ukraine is actually happening? And I was just like, I've sort of lost you here and this is really, really sad because he's an amazing graphic designer. So you have to, as a narrative designer, you have to understand the world because what you're going to do in your games and what you're going to do in your things is going to be a reference to the world because then you maintain that engagement, you maintain that thing where people understand the things, the context going on. Even if you've changed it in a lot of different ways, they understand that context. Mobile, email, LinkedIn, please follow me on LinkedIn, send me a connection request. Really, really happy to like connect to everybody. I think there's not a student in Uppsala. If I see Uppsala, I'm like, yeah, just connect. It's great. Feel free to ask me questions. Never get worried about like, oh, will Phil have the time to like do this? Will Phil be available to do this? Yes, I am. I am really, really supportive of like indie projects and things like this. I love working on them. I love feeding back. I love listening to things. I love play testing things. If you want to know where I like sit on like certain subjects, really, really happy to do that. Not really happy to share here. But as an example, I'm part of the Limit Break program in the UK, which supports anybody of a minority in the games industry from getting ahead. And I mentor a number of people there. And I'm really, really proud to do that. It's a great initiative there. And I think equally, as long as like people are happy to, anybody here who's been a judge or a juror or things like this should be equally easy to like reach out to. And on that basis, has anybody got any questions? And there's a mic here, so just, yes.
Does this work? Oh, it's recording, that's what it does. My question is about, I recently read a book, and in that book, a character was killed off-screen very abruptly after they had built him up as a minor villain. For some reason, it felt like it fit into the story, but I've also been warned about not doing twists of fate. It's just bad luck that this happened. Because they should, like I said, it should be why. You should ask, why is this happening? Why is this part of the story? What is good to think about when you want to integrate something that is purely a twist of chance that it happened?
So it's about what you want your game and the environment and the world to say. If you want to have that twist of chance, you can't do it more than once, otherwise it becomes Pulp Fiction. So the Pulp Fiction thing, one of the reasons I understand that the writer of Uncharted sort of left in the third Uncharted game, great writer, Amy Hennig, and like the Uncharted series has got really, really fantastic things, was because they didn't, sorry, I'm going to do a spoiler, they didn't want Sully to die. And if you actually watch the whole thing is about Nathan Drake realizing he's taking more and more risks throughout like the three things, and those risks are going to come back and bite him. And therefore, like Sully turning up in the final act, like, is so Pulp Fiction. And the rest of the story hasn't had that Pulp Fiction feel. So it feels like for me, it feels like it's really, really tacked on and things like this. I think the scene with Drake in the desert is amazing, because it's him really, really questioning, has he gone too far, and can he get back now? Can he like save like that type of thing? So I don't think that's a problem, but you can't do it again. Yesterday I was talking to a couple of amazing students who were talking about their time travel like story. And they said, what about this? And I said, you can do it once, but you can't do it twice, because as soon as you do it twice, you can do it any number of times. The end of BioShock Infinite, sorry, another spoiler, is rubbish. Because the end of BioShock Infinite says there's an infinite number of lighthouses with an infinite number of possibilities. And years ago at the University of Abertay, I did a talk where it's just like, let's talk about the world which was created, which is just cats and evil walruses. And walruses pretending to be cats. Because it says that can be like a possibility. The most important thing is you don't paint yourself into a corner. And the narrative designer should stop you painting yourself into a corner. I'm going to kill this character, but this character's carrying this item, this compass that's really, really important. What's going to happen to that compass going forward? Oh, that's a good point. Maybe a scene before, it's just like, I think I'm going to do something foolish, and passes the compass to another character going forwards. You can change who the hero of the story is. You really, really can. And you can also consider whether it's a hero or an object that's going forward. In the Star Wars trilogy, the proper trilogy, there's the whole thing about the fact that there's twins and stuff like that. Oh, you know, I fear the boy is our lost hope. No, there is another. There's that Luke and Leia thing. Now, Yoda just looks stupid because there's about 78 other Jedi like meandering around like the galaxy at that point in time. Just make sure you don't get into the 78 meandering like Jedi-like thing, and you'll be absolutely like fine. If it plays a really, really good part in your story, and it does say nobody's safe here, then that's a great way of like saying nobody's safe here. And like maybe the administration can catch up to anybody, or things like this, or accidents do happen. Start of Up is an amazing example of this.
Sorry, what?
The film Up.
Oh.
Puts me in tears every time because he loses his wife, and it's this close relationship and things like this. And you're like, whoa, am I going to have to sit through a few hours of this because I'm going to be a mess by the end of it? But then Up sort of like goes in a different direction and things like this. And it also has my favorite dog character in all of animation. So it's just like squirrel. Don't worry about it. Yes.
Is there an exemption to the rule of do not reinvent? Is there something, because you mentioned adaptation, is there something that you so often adaptate that you would almost call it reinventing? Like, is there something that you feel like where you break this rule?
Yes, but I'll be very, very careful about it. So with your game, Tensor, I would really, really we talked a little bit about sort of narrative and like that Ed 209 and things like this to like add to the game. I wouldn't have the robots selling ice cream in the middle of like the things like this. It's like, but if you look at Speedball, which is a really, really old Atari ST game, when somebody gets like knocked out on like the pitch, in the background you can hear ice cream, ice cream. And it works really, really well. You've got to choose the right moment to break the rule. And remember, once you've broken the rule once, if you keep breaking it, people will just be, that is the rule, not the breaking of the rule. So be really, really sure when you want to break it and how you want to break it, because that can change your world and the way that the world is like achieved. Although Final Fantasy VII, The Death of Aerith, sorry, another spoiler, is a really, really good example of like breaking the rule. And I'm talking about the original obviously. Yes.
Thank you. So one thing that I've come to realize recently is that something that I really don't like in very narratively focused games is when they remind me that I am playing a video game. And this happens very often in some older games, I'd say, where you're in this very immersive world and you don't really know what's going on. And suddenly you're transitioning into a new space and there's a little loading screen, or now loading UI element in the corner. And that's something that really, really bothers me. And to contrast that, you mentioned Clair Obscure before, and I think they do something very elegant there where they don't have like a now loading thing. They have some rose petals in the corners that are just there, add some atmospheric flair to it. And I feel like that's one thing that can easily bring me out of an immersion. Even though it's small, it does impact me in some way in the background, I feel. And I'm curious, do you have any common pitfalls that also lead to immersion-breaking stuff that you wouldn't necessarily consider?
I think Clair Obscure does a really, really good job of ending on denouement and ending on a really, really thing where you as the player actually just want to take a good breath. And like that's, oh, good, that's my breath like going forwards and I can like think about this. That's one way that you can do it. You just end on like a cliffhanger. When I do tabletop role-playing, one of the reasons people really, really enjoyed my games, and one of the reasons I ran a game over 3 sessions in a week where I had 73 players in like those 3 sessions, all being able to impact on each other's like thing in the same universe, was because I let them get on, but we always ended on a cliffhanger. And this, interestingly, that also led to people saying, oh, we'll not have another space battle this week because Phil spent all of his budget on the space battle last week, when this was just like a narratively like read sort of like Dungeons and Dragons thing. It's about making sure that when you do that, when you see those breaks coming, that you do something powerful where the player will want a breath, a really, really hard battle. I think, you know, God of War Ragnarok was meant to be 2 games, and it like was pushed down into 1. I understand that because of COVID and a whole bunch of like different things. You can see where the first game ends, because it's the bit where he does the thing that he's been said, I'm definitely not going to do. And it's such a good like cliffhanger. And it would be, I would quite happily in the cinema be, you got my money for the next part of this going forwards. So it's about understanding what that natural break in like the thing is. And sometimes editing in that natural break and maybe saying, oh, we can't put all of this stuff in and we can't do all of this just now. We'll have to leave it later, or maybe we'll find it in found files that the players can read if they want to. Things like this. It's about not breaking the immersion. And older games do break the immersion a lot, but it's because they need more loading screens going forwards. Have we got time for one more? One more.
So speaking in like terms of, you know, the tip of the iceberg and everything, I've seen an increasing trend now, especially in indie games, where developers usually they rely on the imagination of their players. I had a narrative consultation with Claire from Smile More, and she had kind of like she had a take on it that if you haven't figured out your own narrative, the background for it, if you don't know your own world, it's lazy narrative. It's lazy writing, while some friends in indie right now, they're banking on that the players will kind of fill in the gaps in their narrative. You know, they're telling a vague narrative, but they can't even answer the questions themselves. And that is, the community kind of like that. I've seen it kind of work. So it's these 2 different philosophies. Where do you stand in it? Do you think it's lazy narrative to not know your narrative and to leave it up to the player? Or do you think, and narrative writers should always, you know their own world, so to speak?
It's brave. Because think about AI chatbots which have been like converted to like speak neo-Nazi doctrine. You've got really, really running a risk of like some players going, oh, this person's like such and such. And you're like, it's not that type of person, and you've lost that control right at that point, because the body politic is the louder voice than you as like the studio at that point, because you've allowed them to be the louder voice, and you've allowed them to take control. Something like Minecraft, I don't think you need that sort of like key thing, because everybody will play it in their own way and they'll see different things in it. But you do have to be very, very wary of like what you're doing and what your game is saying. Because if you start saying something in your game and then they take control of that point, then you lose it. And then you potentially lose the game as well, because it goes in a direction you never wanted it to go in. So it's not necessarily lazy, it's risky, is what I'd say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the wonderful questions. We want to hear you again.
Thank you.
We want